Ian, thank you for the introduction, for helping to organize this, and for welcoming us and making sure that we got to the right place on campus today so that we could be with you all. Thanks to Wartburg, to President Colson, who may or may not be here, but even in his absence, we want to thank him for making this possible and bringing us out to the campus and opening up the campus to the community of Waverly as well. I was just told about the tortoises on campus, and so this is something that I want to see for myself, and if Cynthia allows me, we're good with sound. If Cynthia allows me, we're going to take a little bit of time to go see these and take pictures of them and send them back to my 10-year-old daughter, Molly, who is the proud mother of a box turtle that we keep at our home in El Paso. And I got to tell you a story. A week ago Sunday, I was on the road in San Diego, California, just before an event like this one. And as I called into home and as my wife Amy answered the phone, I could hear the most terrifying screaming and crying in the background. And it was Molly who had just discovered that Gus, her box turtle, had gone missing. And it did not look good, because not only was everything in the turtle enclosure, which she inexplicably kept on the ground in our living room, open to all passersby, including 2 dogs and a cat and the fellow humans, her brothers who are in the house, but everything had been overturned. There was a trail of turtle food going out from the enclosure to the backyard where our dog Artemis hangs out, and where she has a collection of our socks and shoes and underwear and other stuff that she's able to pick up. And so, pretty clear that Artemis had eaten Gus, and Molly just could not get over it and was beside herself. So a couple of days after that, Amy gets a call from school, from Mesita Elementary, where Molly goes to school, and they're calling to tell her that another animal that we had lost, and please, no judgment on your work family, but we had adopted a hamster and had donated it to Molly's classroom, and that hamster had gotten out of its enclosure. They were calling to tell us that the hamster, Napoleon, had been found. And so we were really excited, and Amy went and started looking around the house and in the backyard, because she said, if Napoleon's okay, maybe Gus is alive as well. And lo and behold, Gus was in a closet, crawling around. We think that Artemis had picked Gus up after eating Gus's food, and that Gus had fought back valiantly, maybe scratched and bitten Artemis, who had dropped Gus, and Gus walked into a closet and is okay. So I am now the father of the happiest 10-year-old girl in the United States of America today. I want you all to know, if I do nothing else right this year, we've made Molly happy. Thanks for welcoming us out and for being here right now. I hope that what has brought you out is the same thing that has brought me here. We have the single greatest set of challenges that the United States of America, that this planet has ever faced. At any part of our lives, when we look at how the lives of others in this country are affected, we understand that we have our work cut out for us. There are tens of millions of our fellow Americans who are unable to see a doctor or afford prescription medications or go to a therapist to treat their schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression. We have women who in states like mine, and perhaps increasingly in states like yours, are not only unable to lawfully obtain an abortion, which has been the law of the land since 1973, when Roe versus Wade was decided, but as reproductive care clinics continue to close around the country, the ability to get a cervical cancer screening or family planning help or to see a provider of any kind is lost to the women in our lives, and it may help to explain a maternal mortality crisis in the United States of America that happens to be 3 times as deadly for women of color in this country. When it comes to higher education, something that you are living and experiencing right now, something that I was lucky enough to be a beneficiary of, thanks to student loans and grants and work-study jobs and the sacrifice of my parents, it is increasingly out of reach for more and more of our fellow Americans. There's $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now. The average graduating senior has $40,000 on her back that she will have to pay off, because student loan debt is the one kind of debt that you must pay off or you will carry it with you all the way to the grave. Someone gave me a statistic about the number of Americans over the age of 60 who are still paying back their student loan debts today. And I don't mean to bum out the students here right now, but I hope that you are part of the urgency in getting this right and ensuring that more of those graduating high school seniors who are going to follow you will be able to afford to attend Wartburg or to go to a community college or to enter an apprenticeship with a union to learn the skills and the trades that will allow them to command a living wage and live with purpose and function and dignity for the rest of their lives. That's a challenge for all of us that we must meet. Some ways that we can do that: ensuring that community college is free for every single American, ensuring that those who go to four-year universities are paying their way when they have the means to do that, but when they don't take on student loan debt that will crush them over the course of their careers after they graduate college, strengthening and lifting up instead of denigrating and diminishing the power of unions. That's one of the ways that we can choose to meet this challenge. And when we do so, we can help ensure that this economy, which is working really well right now for a very few number of Americans, the very wealthiest and those at the top of corporations that are sitting on record piles of cash today, many of whom paid last year precisely $0 in taxes to the federal government after receiving almost $2 trillion in tax breaks that flowed to the wealthiest and to corporations disproportionately over other Americans. To open that economy up to others, it means that we pay a living wage for everyone who works in this country. You can work all day, every day for $7.25 an hour, and you will not have enough money to put a roof over your head, food on the table, and set something aside for your kids and the next generation. That's why so many of our fellow Americans are working 2 and 3 jobs right now just to make ends meet. And in this state, after we ended the ability for teachers and public school educators to organize for better pay and working conditions and the provision of a world-class education to their students, we're increasingly seeing educators working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, or just deciding that they're going to leave Iowa altogether and teach calculus or literature in Minnesota or Wisconsin or some other state, but not this one, the very one that invested in their success in the first place. I'll give you another challenge. 2.3 million of our fellow Americans, human beings, behind bars right now, as we enjoy our freedom today and willingly participate in our democracy, they are unable to do that. Disproportionately comprised of people of color, far too many there for nonviolent drug crimes, though Americans of all races use and deal illegal drugs at the same rate. Only some Americans of some races are likely to be stopped, to be frisked, to be arrested, to be convicted, to be put behind bars, who upon release, for every job that they apply for, will be forced to check a box stating that they have a conviction, making it less likely that they get the job. Anytime they try to go on to higher education, will be functionally prevented from doing that because they will no longer qualify for federally sponsored student loans. We are doing this to our fellow Americans right now. And that challenge also has a solution. It means that we end a war on drugs that has become a war on people, some people more than others. It means that we end the prohibition of marijuana and we expunge the arrest records for everyone caught in possession of a substance that today is legal in most states in this country right now, and yet we're still locking some people up in other states for possession of it. It means that we have real criminal justice reform, not just taking those steps that I described. In addition, ending the cash bail system. You should not be too poor to have your freedom and your independence in this country. Ending the for-profit prison industry. Nobody should be able to make a profit on locking people up in cages, and yet they do right now. But getting to the root of structural and foundational racism in this country, a legacy that we have never yet squarely faced and accounted for, redressed, or repaired. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression and redlining, the effects compounded over time we are still seeing today, and we're still committing some of the same sins and injustices on this generation, and we will for the next until we get it right. How else can you explain 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America today? How else can you explain the fact that at 4 or 5 years old, in a kindergarten classroom, a child of color is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled? That schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline that produced the prison population that I just described begins when the kid is defenseless and vulnerable in the kindergarten classroom. That maternal mortality discrepancy that I just described, it also extends to infant mortality. The rate of infant mortality between white and black America, the difference today is greater in 2019 than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. This is a very tough but very necessary conversation for this country to have. And if we do not, we will never, ever get it right. And my hope is in 2019, leading into 2020, at this very divided, highly polarized moment in our history, with a president who describes Klansmen and white supremacists and white nationalists as very fine people, who describes asylum seekers as animals and an infestation, calls Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, that we meet that racism and we meet this challenge not just in defeating that man who represents the worst impulses of this country, but that we understand that underlying that, for the entire history of our country, have been foundational and structural problems of which he is just the latest manifestation. This is a chance for this country to come together, to meet each and every single one of those challenges that we face, and perhaps the greatest of them all. We know now, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius over pre-industrial revolution levels just since 1980. And it is that warming caused by my and your inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth, our own emissions, our own excesses, not God, not Mother Nature, that has produced the flooding that we've seen on the Missouri River, the greatest since we've been keeping records of the Missouri River, the flood levels that we just saw in Davenport, the highest that we've seen since we've been recording flood levels in Davenport, breaking the record set in 1993, the 58 inches of rain that fell from the sky in Houston, Texas during Hurricane Harvey. That was the single greatest rainfall from a single storm in the entire history of North America. And it was the third 500-year flood in just 5 years in Southeast Texas. The droughts that preceded the greatest wildfires we'd ever seen in California, also the greatest on record. So the devastation, the destruction, the loss of property and human life, that is climate change happening right now. It is not something for which we must be prepared or brace ourselves. It is something that we are enduring at this very moment. And the only way to meet this is not by half measures or half steps or only half the country. If it's only one person, one president, one party, one part of the United States, we will have lost the battle before it even began. We've got to bring every single one of us into this solution. Put farmers into the driver's seat. Give them a performance outcome that we expect, and they will innovate their way to it. Allow them to make a profit, planting cover crops to pull more of that carbon out of the air, drive more of it into the soil. Open up new technologies like precision tilling or no-tilling farming to disturb less of the carbon that is there. Pay them for the public good that they are providing, in addition to growing the food that we and so much of the world depends on. Invest in pre-disaster mitigation for those communities that we know will continue to flood again and again because the rains are coming down harder, more frequently, more devastating. We've dried up all the wetlands in Iowa to make the most fertile farmland in the world, and that water now has nowhere to filter, and it's rushing out to my part of the world in the Gulf of Mexico, carrying with it pollutants that create dead zones that are the size of this state. We all have our part to do, investing in the transition off of fossil fuels and to renewable energy, where you have been a leader, not just in biofuels, but in wind and solar, where El Paso, we're building out utility scale solar. And if we invest in the next generation of technologies, the storage devices and technologies that will allow us to redistribute that wind and solar energy when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, not only will we help this country reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, not only will we be halfway there by 2030, we will own this for the rest of the world. And it will be our innovation, our businesses, our technologies that dominate the world's transition to renewable energy. This is our opportunity, and it is a window that will close within the next 10 years. A decade is all the scientists have given us to get this right. So I want to make sure that at this defining moment of truth for us, it does not matter to me how young you are, how old you are, who you love, to whom you pray, whether you pray at all, how many generations you can count your family an American, or whether you just got here this morning. The fact is, at this moment, all that matters is that we are Americans first, with the greatest challenges before us and the greatest opportunity to reveal our potential and fulfill our promise as a country. In this campaign, you will see us going everywhere, listening to everyone, learning from those whom we hope to serve, putting their ideas, their stories at the forefront of this campaign, regardless of the differences between us. That's the way that I want to run, that's the way that I want to serve, and that's the reason that I'm here to ask for your support to be the next president of the United States of America. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for having us out. We are looking forward to having a chance to answer your questions. Cynthia Cano, who's right here to your right, has got a microphone. If you raise your hand and get her attention, she'll bring that mic to you. Hi.
Hi, I'm Christine Carpenter from the Beyond Pink team, the only nonprofit, all-volunteer breast cancer organization in this Northeast Iowa. And I've asked you before if you would support our National Breast Cancer Coalition public policy platform. And my colleague in New Hampshire has also asked you. And the public policy platform is access to quality, affordable, evidence-based health care for all. It's research, including adequate and transparent research funding, and also influence, where trained advocates are sitting at all decision-making tables. You've told us that you had to think about it and read about it. Well, it's time to take action now. I have one right here that you can sign, because women are dying in the meantime. So would you sign our public policy platform?
So I agree with all the goals that you just stated. Please allow me a little bit more time to do my due diligence and read it through, and I apologize that you're asking me again. Cynthia Cano, I need you to help make sure that we get this done. And I'd love to get you an answer within the day. I don't think you want me to sign on to anything unless I've read it all the way through. But as you just described the aims, I'm with you on that same page and want to make sure that we're together on this one. So asking you, Cynthia, to make sure that we follow through on this one, okay? Thank you very much for being here.
Yes,
Grateful.
thank you, and we will tell our advocacy networks all over the state who has worked with us and supports this, and who has declined it in the presidential candidates before they caucus to think about that. So I hope you'll sign, because I'd love to have you on as one of those who supports it.
Great. Thank you for being here. Very, very grateful.
Hi, my name is Tommy Allen. So we live in a society where slander is very present. In the entire last election, it was almost as if it was an entertainment system was how slanderous it was. How do you plan on combating that if it comes your way?
I think the only way to answer that is in my performance here today as a member of the El Paso City Council, where I was neither a Republican or a Democrat in a nonpartisan elected position, just had to deliver for my constituents. In the United States Congress as a Democrat for 6 years, every single day in the minority, but able to get things done like expanding access to mental health care for veterans, protecting public lands, improving the security and safety at our border while facilitating legitimate trade and travel. Every one of those things that we got done with Republican colleagues. We made a virtue of a necessity. It was the only way to make progress. And in some instances, we had that legislation signed into law by Donald J. Trump, a person with whom I agree on almost nothing, and yet we found enough common ground to get that done. You've heard, as I describe why I'm running, not what I am against, and not how bad the other person is, but what it is I think that we can do in common, what our challenges are, what it will take to meet them, what our vision is for success, and our call to ambition and aspiration from all of us to meet those challenges. We're either going to be defined by our pettiness, by our fears, by our paranoia, by all those that we want to make you angry about or keep you apart from. And that's the strategy of the current occupant of the White House. Or we will be defined by the great things that we want to do and the creativity and imagination and service and sacrifice that we bring to bear in order to achieve them. And so when I talk about the way that I've served, the way that I campaign, in Texas, we went to each one of the 254 counties. I didn't go to the reddest counties in the state of Texas. I went to the reddest counties in the United States of America. Ones that voted for Donald Trump, 96% in the last election. I didn't demean them. I didn't write them off. I didn't call them names. I did not judge them. I showed up to listen to them, to respect them, because I sought to serve them and fight for them. And I had no hope of delivering if I had not shown up first to hear what was on their minds. So that's the way that I'm wired. That's the way that I campaign and the way in which I serve. And if I'm your nominee, this country's going to have a very clear choice in someone, as you just described, who looks at politics as entertainment and an opportunity to demean and divide people, and someone who looks at it as a calling, as a way to bring people together around common ambitions. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here today. It's really impressive to have somebody that come to small town Iowa in the first place, and I'm an alumni anyway. So my biggest question is people with disabilities are often people the most in need of quality healthcare insurance and low income. It's not just people with all kinds of disabilities. But the biggest thing, privatization of Medicaid has really, really affected this population in Iowa. And many of us, I'd say 50% of the people I know want to work, but if they don't have access to these long-term care services, they don't have any chance of actually being a working tax-paying American. Any ideas on healthcare and people with disabilities ability to work?
Yeah. Great question, and I love the way that you phrase this. Universal guaranteed high-quality healthcare is not just the right thing to do. It doesn't just allow us to follow the moral imperative as the wealthiest and most powerful country on the face of the planet that is seeing people today die of diabetes 97 years after insulin was developed, or curable cancers, or the flu. To me, that's unconscionable. But you also point out that we're not allowing people to live to their full potential. When they're well enough to go to school, graduate from college, go to a job, pay taxes, start a business, create jobs, they're able to shoulder their fair share of the burden, which everybody wants to be able to do. That burden, therefore, rests a little bit lighter on everybody else. So it also is a way of unleashing the true economic potential and performance, not just of every American, but of this economy. So investing in that, which does not sound like an inexpensive proposition, ensuring that every single person can see that doctor, receive that medication, get that therapy, be well enough to be who they're supposed to be. That may be expensive, but relative to how we pay or fail to pay for care today, when the largest provider of mental health care services in Texas is the county jail system, when those who are not able to afford insulin have diabetes, then have glaucoma, then are taking themselves to the emergency room where the outcomes will not be as good, where the care is going to be exponentially more expensive, where they will be in no way able to pay for it. But you will, if you're lucky enough to have insurance through rising premium costs. I will, as a taxpayer. Making that investment then seems like a really smart choice that pays returns over the lifetime of the beneficiary, which is ultimately the American taxpayer. In our schools, as you may know, we have a program called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, The federal government is supposed to pay 40% of the cost of making sure that we're there to bring out the full potential of all of our students. Right now, we pay about 17%. I want to make sure that the federal government pays its full freight to bring out the very best from those students and to support those educators, very often in special needs classrooms, who have more students than they can adequately spend time on. Let's double up our resources there so that every child gets the education that they need. And then lastly, one of the disturbing trends, and this has ownership both of Republicans and Democrats, in the care for Americans living with disabilities, is to institutionalize them. Not only is that incredibly expensive to do, but again, on the moral dimension of this, it robs them of their independence, their ability to contribute to the success of their families and of their communities. So ensuring that our public policy supports people in their homes, with their families, in their communities, and allows them to enter the workforce and give us everything that they were born to do over the course of their lives is just smart public policy as well. So those are some steps I would like to take to get to those goals, to make sure that we're allowing everyone to reach their full promise. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
We're straight in the back.
Beto, my name is Alex. I may not be a native of Iowa. I'm a native of Colorado, but I enjoy being able to get different views from different states. And this kind of hits hard with what your conversation was with coming out here to campaign, how you campaign with the people and you want to listen to voices. A little explanation with this question is if you would be in support of something called the Anti-Corruption Act. This is an act that is somewhat foundational in House Resolution 1 that was passed by the House of Representatives in the past year that deals with political bribery and special interest donors and eliminating that what we call dark money from the political spectrum. And I was wondering if you would be in support of a bill of that nature, not only as a fellow citizen, but also as a future president, where you end gerrymandering, you stop the revolving door, you get special interests out so that the people of the United States represent Congress, not people that represent corporations, special interest donors, and a lot of other groups of people that may not represent the entire US population.
Thanks, it's a really great question. And so HR 1, which deals with campaign, election, gerrymandering, political contribution reform, I am in full support of. So if that is the specific question, the answer is yes. And I'll just tell you from my own experience and perspective, when we won a long shot campaign against the odds and against the incumbent in 2012 to represent my hometown in the United States Congress, the first big surprise is that all those other members of Congress turn out to be, for the most part, really nice, good people who ran for the right reasons and are doing their best to serve their constituents. The next big surprise for me helps to explain the disconnect between how I felt about those members of Congress and the performance of Congress as an institution. My first full day of orientation as a new member of Congress was not about how a bill becomes a law or how to gain the subject matter expertise on the Committee of Jurisdiction, which you had just been appointed to, or how to build relationships with Republicans so that you could get something done. It was how to raise enough money to guarantee your reelection and to knock out those Republican incumbents so that your party could gain the majority. Now listen, the motivation was great. You got elected to do these great things. We want to put you into the majority so that you can accomplish them. But the compromises that you make in order to do that end up compromising your ability to serve the people that you represent. Otherwise, there's no other way to explain how in 2017, the Congress passed, the President signed into law, a bill that allows internet service providers to take your private browsing data and without your consent, sell it to the highest bidder. And we can all think of the weirdest places that we've ever been online, and now know that that was sold to somebody who was willing to pay the price without our permission. It is at odds with consumer interest, with the constituents of those members of Congress, but it was paid for by those who wrote the PAC checks that opened up the doors and literally purchased the outcomes of that legislation, we pay for as taxpayers. The research and development that goes into coming up with the cures and medications that are then sold back to us at the highest prices on the planet. Though we have the purchasing power and leverage of buying in bulk for Medicare and Medicaid and TRICARE and VA and federally insured employees, we do not use that leverage to bring drug prices down. It does not make any sense unless you follow the money, the PACs, the dark money that finds its way onto the rolls of the members of the Commerce and Energy Committee that sets the rules of the road for that industry. So for that reason, for 5 years, I've not taken any PAC money at all, no corporate help, no special interest contributions, no lobbyists in this presidential run. And we also recently signed the fossil fuel pledge to make sure that there's neither the appearance of a conflict of interest or a real conflict of interest. I want you to know that I only answer to you, to human beings, to my fellow Americans, not to any other entities or organizations. So yes, let's walk the talk. Let's live it in our campaigns. And yes, let's pass legislation that ends the practice of members of Congress choosing their voters instead of the other way around and gerrymandering. Let's get big dark money out of congressional races and federal elections, and let's return democracy back to people. Thank you for the question. Appreciate that.
I guess mine is really kind of a two-part request. First, as there are so many Democratic candidates running, it seems like more and more people are trying to make themselves stand out in the pack. And so we are beginning to be offered and promised unrealistic things. Things like $2,000 pay increases for teachers across the country, which I know makes a great soundbite, but leaves us thinking how realistic and where would that money come from. And I know that's not your proposal. And I know that I'm not aware of you doing that to date, or I wouldn't be standing here now. But I would encourage you to please not fall into the trap of pandering to us, because we see past the smoke and mirrors, and my vote is not for sale. But the second part of that is, I support all of the things that you've talked about today. But what I do need to hear are some details. How, those are great, wonderful ideas that I support. What I want is somebody to tell me how the details of how they actually intend to accomplish those things.
So you've caught me in a dilemma here. In order to be respectful of people's time and to touch upon the issues that we're all thinking about, I've got to keep that speech within a certain time limit to make sure that I answer your questions. But I want to make sure that I also answer this one in the specific. Give me an issue that you care about and give me a few minutes to answer it in detail.
Well, I'm glad to hear you touch on healthcare today, because healthcare seems to be an issue that is important, continues to be important to the American people, and I think everyone or their family has been touched by it in some way. But it's getting pushed to the back burner because it's not getting the press and media that some of the other issues, walls and those things are today. Right. So any details as to how we can accomplish getting that for people?
Yes, thanks for asking the question. And it has particular resonance, I understand, in Iowa, where we just had a failed privatization of Medicaid, which has sent reimbursement rates plummeting for providers. I just talked to an administrator of a rural hospital in Hamburg, Iowa. And from what he shared with me, it really sounds like it's going to be difficult going forward to keep the doors of that hospital open. In my home state of Texas, where we declined to even expand Medicaid in the first place, you're seeing one rural hospital after another shut down. The viability and the vitality of those rural communities is withering away. After the hospital shuts down, how do you recruit the school teacher to come to the independent school district? How do you get the young person who's moved away for college to even consider moving back? You don't. And so this is connected to so many other issues. The proposal that I am making is that everyone today who has no insurance at all be enrolled in Medicare. And I made the case earlier that that's a lot less expensive than waiting for their care to be delivered at the emergency room, where it's exponentially more expensive and the outcomes are far lower than they would have been otherwise. Or delivering mental health care in a county jail, where we so often do these days. Those who have insufficient insurance, meaning they're covered, but their care is not guaranteed. There was a school teacher in Weatherford, Texas, year before last, who died of the flu. Now, she had health insurance, but her copay on her flu medication was $219, which she did not have in her checking account. Ended up dying of something that is obviously curable or preventable unnecessarily. So if you cannot bridge your deductible, pay your premium, afford your copays, you can enroll in Medicare as well. However, if you have employer-sponsored insurance, private insurance, and it works for you and your family, and you want to be able to keep it under our plan, you would be able to do it. And if at any point you elect to move over to Medicare, you can do that as well. The total cost of this program is a fraction of Medicare for all. And it also is, I believe, politically the surest and the quickest path to get to universal guaranteed high quality healthcare. So that's the path that I'd like to take. That's some additional detail that shares with you how we're able to get there. But in the very short term, let's make sure that we shore up ACA. Let's make sure that we reverse this privatization of Medicaid in Iowa, and let's guarantee that everybody's able to get that care that they need to live to their full potential. Thanks for asking the question. Really appreciate it.
All right, this is our last question.
Thank you for coming to Wartburg and Waverly. One of the biggest threats to Mali's future is the federal deficit, which this year is going to be $1 trillion in 1 year. Mr. Trump has financed an economic boom with debt. What are you going to do about that?
You're right about the threat. As we continue to deficit spend to the tune of $1 trillion a year, adding to $22 trillion of debt, the service payments on that debt will occlude or cloud out our ability to pay for anything else that we need to fund in this country, whether it's education or support for students to be able to attend Wartburg or infrastructure or anything that you want to do will no longer become affordable for this country. And it is happening at a time that Republicans had controlled every single lever of power. A great opportunity, though this is the last of the reasons to be talking about this, but a great opportunity for Democrats to reclaim the mantle of fiscal responsibility in the United States of America. How did we get to this point? During the George W. Bush administration, there were 2 separate rounds of tax cuts that were expensive to finance, added to the debt, flowed disproportionately to the wealthiest in this country. In this administration, 2 years ago, at a time that we were $21 trillion in debt, our answer to the challenges of this country was a $2 trillion tax cut that flowed to the wealthiest at a time of wealth inequality that was unlike any other time in our history, and at a moment that we had so many unmet needs in this country and corporations who were sitting on record piles of cash. Además, in addition, we are in our 18th year of war in Afghanistan, our 28th year of war in Iraq through 6 successive presidential administrations. I was the age of some of the people here in this room. I was a senior in high school when George H.W. Bush first announced the use of military force and U.S. service members in that country, and we've been there every single administration since. Tonight, those service members' lives on the line with no definition of victory, no commonly understood strategy, and no prospect of an exit or an end to this fight. That has racked up additional trillions of dollars on that debt. When you add to that the greatest recession since the Great Depression and the bailout that helped to start the economic recovery that this president is taking credit for, you begin to understand how we got here. So how do we get out? We rolled back the worst excesses of those Trump tax cuts. We had a corporate rate that was brought down from 35% to 21%. Even if you didn't take it all the way back up, but moved it into the mid-20s, you would generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If in that same tax code, you were to tax capital at the same rate that you tax ordinary income or wages, you would generate additional hundreds of billions of dollars. And if we were to decide as a country that we were not going to pursue our foreign policy on the backs of 18 and 19 and 20-year-old women and men who are deployed not just in Afghanistan and Iraq tonight, but in Syria, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, just to name 6 countries that we are now at war in, there would be a tremendous savings in human life. There would be greater ability for us to achieve our foreign policy goals, and we would save over the long term trillions of dollars in the costs of war and the cost to care for those who have fought those wars over the long term. The prospects in the short term do not look good. The president has threatened to invade Venezuela and is now sending an aircraft carrier group and land-based bombers to confront Iran at this moment. If you look to the president who preceded him, without firing a shot or sending a single U.S. service member, he was able to negotiate an end to Iran's nuclear armament program. It didn't solve every problem in the Middle East or every one of our problems with Iran, but I think it affords us a great template that is affordable for this country and affordable for those who we ask to put their lives on the line for the United States of America. So those are some of the changes that I would take in tax code, in our foreign policy, that would not only make this a stronger country, but would end to deficit spending in the United States of America. Thanks, appreciate it. That's it, okay. So Cynthia's telling me that was our final question. Waverly, Wartburg, thank you for inviting us out to be here today. Ian, thank you for getting us kicked off. Really grateful for all the questions, your attention. Hope to earn your support and your commitment to caucus for us. We will be back to make sure that we answer more questions. I cannot tell you how many Iowans I've met who tell me, I like you, Beto, but I'm waiting for the 4th or 5th visit until I can really make up my mind. So you all take this seriously, and I appreciate that. I want to make sure that I'm responsive to that, and that you're allowed to do your due diligence on me as a candidate. Thank you all for having us out. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
For those that would like a photo or anything signed, Beto will be downstairs for just a few minutes. So give us just a minute here for him to get downstairs, and then we'll start to funnel back out and down.